Well, welcome back to the Encounter Faith podcast, everybody. My name is Ross, and I've already done, I think, a podcast, maybe a podcast and a half with my guest today, Aubrey Sampson. Aubrey, thank you so much for doing this.
Ross, thank you for having me. Such a thrill to be here. Yeah, we should have been recording. We've been chatting for a while about
Yeah.
life and
Yeah. And
ministry and
you're,
things.
now all of the people who I regularly have on the podcast know my wife, Lauren, like her so much better than like me, but you also fit into that category. So you should have been doing this podcast a long time ago.
I do. I love Lauren. Your wife is amazing. Yeah, so well done, sir.
Hey, it's the best decision I ever made and the worst decision she ever made. So, what I want to do though today is talk about a few different things with you. So, you are a pastor, you are a speaker, you are an author. We could
Yeah.
spend the rest of the interview just talking about your bio. I say that tongue in cheek, but I do want people to make sure this is one of those episodes where if you don't go to the show notes to learn more about what Aubrey's doing, you are really much missing out. As much as good of a conversation as Aubrey and I are about to have, I want everyone listening to dive further into the work that you're doing because I really feel like you are filling a gap that exists in the Big C Church. So I want to
Mhm.
start with your book, What We
Yeah.
Find in the Dark, but there's a bunch more I want to get into. So first of all, though, you wrote a book, and as someone who's written exactly zero books, anytime anyone does that, I'm just very much I'm impressed at baseline.
Wow, thank you so
But
much.
what made you go from this is something I feel
Yeah.
to this is something that needs to exist in the world?
Yeah, I wrote the book What We Find in the Thank you by the way for asking that question. It's a good one. I wrote What We Find in the Dark while my very best friend in the world, my ride or die 25 years was dying of breast cancer. And I am a writer. And so I think listeners need to understand that. So what I mean when I say that is I pray when I type. I process when I type. I make sense of things in the world when I type. I make sense of what God is doing in my life when I type. And so I grieve through typing. And so I was losing my best friend. I had been praying for a very long time for cancer eradication, and
Sure.
that was not the ground we were walking on anymore. And so I couldn't sleep at night just out of fear and anticipatory grief and sadness and frustration. And so I would be up in the middle of the night not sleeping. And I actually had a friend who was nursing newborn twins at the time. And so she was also up in the middle of the night not sleeping for very different
Sure.
reasons, but she would check in on me. And one day she said, "You need to be writing. Every time you're up, you need to be writing." And I was like, yeah, I need to be writing. And so I began typing it literally in the middle of the night and figuratively in the middle of a spiritual night,
Sure.
just to process like, I'm in pain. I hate this. I don't know what
Yeah.
to do. And a little bit to mark every final moment. Like, I was about to lose the person who I talked to every single day, multiple times a day, saw regularly. I didn't want to miss anything, and I
Sure.
knew our days were numbered. And so my writing in the middle of the night was not ultimately for a book. It was just to be like, Lord, I don't know what you're doing. I don't like it. I'm not sure that I agree with you on it. I'm not sure that I want to continue hanging out with you. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna type, and that's gonna be my prayer and my lifeline to you, and trust you to show up in it. Um, and then oddly enough, I had a book due. So, not everyone grieving and typing at the same time also is under a book contract, but I was. And so I very
That sound that
practically,
listeners are hearing is the sound of about 20 people who listen to this podcast on a regular basis who feel that deeply.
like what that is, right?
100%.
So I did say to my editor, I had pitched a different book, but I said to my editor, I actually think there's something here, but I am not ready to go public with this yet. Like
Sure.
it is too raw, it is not processed, it is for me only, God only, it is not for anybody else. So she actually extended the deadline for several months. It might even been almost a year, which I feel very grateful for. And then I began to turn this into something that other people who are walking through fresh grief might need. And so it's a pretty raw book, Ross, because I was writing it as I was in the middle of it. But I think the unique position that it's in because of that is to say to people who are in it, like, I know, I
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
know.
And that comes across on every page. I think one of the things that drew me to it as someone who's not currently in a season like that is so many of conversations like that in the big C church world can feel performative or prescriptive.
Yeah,
And when you are in those types of seasons, those are the last things you need is
totally.
someone telling you this is the thing that worked for me. And there's something really beautiful about the simplicity of I know, because so often when we're in those moments, most people who are listening can identify being in a moment like that and having someone who didn't say anything, but their presence was what was most effective.
Yes.
And you figured out a way to put that into a book form. So sincerely, like,
Mm,
well done, because
thank
this is
you.
something that I think as a church, again, a big C church, we're not very good at talking about. One
Right.
of the things that's interesting to me, you talk about being a writer, you have a pretty wide view of churches. And I don't know how to ask this question more eloquently than why are we bad at this?
Yeah, it's
Because
a
as a
great
communications person,
question.
I feel like we should be better at it, especially with
Yeah.
people like you helping. So, how did we get to a point as a church where these types of hard conversations
Mhm.
get siloed
Yeah.
or get put aside rather than embraced as part of the full experience?
Yeah, I do think there is something, especially in the Western church,
Sure.
where because of our culture outside of the church, we just like a victory story. Like, you just want a
Mhm.
mountaintop. We just do. I have a good friend from Zambia, and we were watching the Creed movies with him. And Creed has these montages where like he's suffering, and then he's coming back to fight. And he looked at me and he goes, "You Americans, you long suffer for 30 minutes." And I was like, "That's it. That's you just nailed it." So there is, I think, something in our DNA, right? Like
Sure.
our cultural DNA, where we just, I don't know, we like a good victory story. We like the small guy rising up and winning. I also think what grief does and what loss does on a deeper level is makes us come face to face with our own limitedness and our own
Mm,
fears and our own, even those of us who are rooted in Christ and have strong beliefs about eternity and new creation and what happens after we die. Even so, it's still unknown if we're going to be
sure.
honest, right?
Yeah.
And so loss, grief, darkness, sadness makes us come to terms with what we don't know, what we can't control, what is uncertain, what is scary. And so no one wants to come face to face with their biggest heartache, fear, thing they can't control. And so I think that's
Mm,
part of why we're bad at it. And I think there's just a basic, like, it's uncomfortable, right? It's hard to know what to say to people who have gone through loss. It's hard to know how to handle it. It's awkward. There's probably, sociologists could probably say more, Ross, but those are the things that come to mind.
that's really good because I think I love that you brought it back to the blunt question because I think folks have an intellectual understanding of it. But one of the things that grieves me for the big C church is our inability to take our intellectual understandings to apply to where people actually are, because we are meant to lead in so many of these areas that we have
Yep.
seeded so much ground in.
Yep.
You said something in when you're describing the book, and that it brings back to doubt, right? Where doubt's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And when you were going through a season of grief, there is a lot of doubt.
Oh, yeah.
I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they keep those doubts. They don't bring those doubts to God. They don't bring those doubts to
Yeah.
other people. But like, what does it look like for you as someone who is, to be frank, now leading in
Yeah.
this particular area
Yeah.
to help folks understand, to put a bit of a cliched phrase to it, how doubt is often the beginning of a story, not the end, or
Yeah.
at least could be.
I love that you said it like that. I think we just have to normalize it, and I do feel like the conversation's changing. I feel really grateful. But what can happen is the Christian goes, I'm doubting, therefore I must be um dematuring spiritually, right? I'm
Sure.
going backwards. Something's wrong. Maybe it's sin in my life. I don't have enough faith. I've done something spiritually. I'm not in a good place. Instead of going, oh, wait, this is actually a really, 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 really normal part of our spiritual growth and formation. And
Right.
actually, sometimes I believe God incites us to doubt on purpose.
Ooh,
I
okay.
I write about this in what we find in the dark, like that, we always go to Jacob wrestling with God when we talk about wrestling with God, right? But I think what's interesting is you find it's a weird story, but you find in the story that the quote God man actually incites the fight. Like Jacob is
Oh, wow.
asleep.
Sure.
And the guy comes and like it's almost like he like kicks him awake and is like, bro, come on, we're gonna wrestle for a while now. And I think it's interesting because what we'll do is we'll go, oh, I'm doubting, it's on me, I'm in a spiritual crisis, blah, blah, instead of, I am in a season of doubt right now.
Yeah.
Historically, doubt has been part of the Christian faith. Ecumenically, it has been. Globally, it has been. Scripturally, it is. So, what might God be doing now? What is God teaching? What's the invitation right now? We just don't normalize it like that. We panic, we freak. And again, that's okay. I mean, there's grace for all of it. God knows where we are. But if we could get better at saying, maybe something isn't wrong, maybe this is part of spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Maybe we're learning faith is not just about a feeling, but it's about the object of our faith, Jesus. Maybe maybe the wrestle is where the goodness is. I think if we can get there, um, well,
Is
less people will be shaken.
yeah. And I think that's again from like a macro level. That's the thing that I want to focus on as we start this conversation because it feels like the quote unquote easier thing to solve. Because even hearing you say the story of Jacob wrestling God is a weird story, people who are new to the family of God need to hear that from people. They need to
Yeah,
hear that, like, we get that that is a weird story
it's so weird.
because otherwise we don't have that. We are completely unable to see the deeper theological truths behind the idea of God starting the fight. I got
Yeah,
three young kids. I'm imagining those moments of like, we call it poking the bear, right? Where it's like, where they are just intentionally trying to do that because they want that fight. And I
yeah.
love the idea of putting that story in that context because I think it's so helpful for people to hear that because to go back to where you started, when you are in those kind of deep, dark night of the soul type experiences,
Yeah.
the first thing that gets taken from you is this sense of, or I'll say it a different way. One of the first things that's happened for me is I believe a lie that I'm alone in it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting to me about you is you are having these conversations in a big C church, speaking,
Mhm.
writing, and
Yeah.
you're also a pastor
Yeah.
and you're doing this in a hyper local way. I would imagine if I was in your position, there would be a moment of like, hey, I read all the books. I know what I'm talking about. You need to just do the thing I'm telling you to do. I read all the books and then I wrote one of them, right?
Right.
Like, what does it
Yeah.
look to take it from this head knowledge to
Uh-huh.
practice
Yeah.
requires an insane amount of empathy.
Yeah.
But how do you navigate that with folks who are part of a community or who are being pastored by you? I'll even broaden
Mm-hmm.
it a little bit from the
Mm-hmm.
local church
Yeah.
because I imagine that's hard. What does that look like?
It is funny you say that. Because I will sometimes, as I'm pastoring, people are walking through seasons of doubt, despair, darkness, and I'll be like, "You guys, haven't you listened to my sermons? Like, haven't you read my books?
100%.
I've
I
given you
would
the resources."
I would be carrying books with me if I
Yeah,
was in
like
your
here,
position.
you're here. Like
Yeah.
just
Page
um
48, right? Like it would have been,
right,
yeah.
right. And as a writer, I am writing with my local context in mind. Like if it doesn't bless my church body, then why would I even write it, you
Sure.
know?
Sure, sure, sure.
Um, but the grace in all of it, and I'll say this anecdotally because I don't know how else to say it. I lost my dad very unexpectedly at the same day 2 years later that I lost my best friend, so just last December. And that is something I am also now in the process of grieving, both that I lost my dad unexpectedly, lost my best friend, and this third thing that had happened on the same day. I don't know how to,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Lord, I don't know. We're gonna deal with that later. Maybe it's a gift. It doesn't feel like one. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Uh-huh.
But my grief over losing my dad is a very different experience than my grief over losing my best friend Jen. Both painful, both awful, both not how I want things to go. My dad died very unexpectedly. Um, Neither feel great or exciting. And yet, what I can remember is I'm pastoring people who I'm like, don't you understand my message? Every grief is different and every pain point is different.
Sure.
And so
Sure. Sure.
so there is no, even though I've done the research, I've written the books, you know this, Ross, like there's not this formula for how we do it right.
Right.
But what we can do is talk about these things. Like it is okay in your grief that you're angry at God. It is okay in your grief that you're not even sure if God is real. It is okay in your grief that you're wondering, oh, I sure do hope my person is in the afterlife with God, or that
Yeah.
Jesus is coming back, or, it is okay to just name those things, say them out loud. And sometimes we say this in the church a lot, God can handle it. And it's like, yeah, we know God can handle it, but it's sometimes like, can we even handle expressing it?
100%.
And I think to create spaces in our churches, that's what I try to do to my church. Even if I'm like, come on, just read the book I wrote. If nothing else, I hope I'm creating a safe space where people can grieve and doubt and ask questions very honestly and not be in a different place than they are. Like it is okay that you are right where you are spiritually. And I want you to grow. I want you to move towards hope. I want you to move towards healing. But you also get to be where you are for as long as you need to be there.
I love that because I think one of the things that's been really cool for me coming into an environment like here at Good Shepherd, where you, in the timeline, you've either just spoken or are just about to speak. And either way, if you were here on Sunday when Aubrey was here, I'm sure it was great. Her
Let's
and I
hope
are,
so.
yeah,
From
her and I
your
are
mouth to
talking
God's
beforehand,
ears.
dear listeners. So this is all me talking to the future. But
Pre-recorded. Yeah.
yeah, it's pre-recorded. I'm just gonna dub over if like if something
Great.
happens,
Perfect.
this is where the explanation is gonna go
Perfect.
because it's a podcast. The stakes couldn't be lower. Anyway,
Right.
what's fascinating to me is you are not only with people as a pastor in moments that are these life trajectory altering moments.
Yeah.
You're also pastoring in 2025.
Yeah.
And in a lot of marketing communications strategy documents that I've made here, there's a lot of Google Docs for me that start with the phrase, being a person in 2025 is just real hard.
It is real hard.
And one of the things that I'm curious about is the lessons and the things we discover in those deep moments.
Yeah.
Can we apply some of that, some of what you talk about in the book,
Hmm.
to those everyday experiences, which aren't necessarily grief,
Yeah.
but are also not necessarily something separate?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Like one, I do think the deeper, harder seasons do build in you a resiliency for the subtle griefs, the microaggressions, the small griefs, whatever you want to call 2025,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The cluster or dumpster fire that it
Uh-huh.
is, the
This podcast doesn't
hardest.
have an E rating, but right now a lot of people are thinking about all the different E words that we could be putting here. Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
exactly.
they should text those in. Um Yeah, the harder seasons I do think give you a resiliency, a strength, a wherewithal
Sure.
for the other seasons, and that is a good gift. Like I think that is something that God does in his mercy is
Good.
give you some kind of like metal to get you through um the next season.
Mhm.
And not that you welcome it or like it, but you're like, "Oh, I can do this in a way I couldn't do 2 years ago. Because we've been through COVID, we can go through 2025. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
something in that that's really true. I think the other thing is just that the muscle of lament that we learn either indirectly, directly, purposeful, unintentionally in seasons of grief to be able to cry out to God, how long, oh Lord, with this will this last? How could you, God? How dare you? How lonely I feel. How are you going to fix this? How is your justice ever going to roll? How will you overcome the evil that I'm seeing? To be able to ask those questions that you learn in seasons of grief and darkness on a more
Mm,
small scale, daily scale, or on behalf of other people who are hurting, that
yeah.
I think becomes a really good, meaningful Christian practice in seasons like 2025 to
Yeah.
cry out collectively, communally, and more consistently, publicly, how long, O Lord? And that lament muscle that we also build in seasons of darkness, I also think really helps us anchor our faith in Christ, in the local church, with other people during seasons where it's like, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm going to keep crying out to you, God, because you are the only judge who is truly just, who can do something in these scenarios.
I love that. That's wonderful because it makes me think about how this is what the church is meant to do.
Yeah.
And I think to some of what we talked about earlier, too often as a church, we can find ourselves wrapped up in metrics of success that are easy to measure.
Yeah.
And we exist as a institution to meet people where others can't meet them. One of my
That's right.
favorite metaphors for this happened with my friends at Awana. There's a pastor out in New York, his name's Sam Luce, and he described during COVID the difference between being Disney and Mr. Rogers, and how Disney can
Mm.
be this wonderfully entertaining, wonderfully vibrant, but it's a fantasy land. And
Yeah.
Mr. Rogers moved into the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's so good.
And I feel like church has to move into the neighborhood for people
Yeah.
because if you are someone who's been a part of a community like Good Shepherd for a long time, I think the trap that gets laid for us is you start appealing to comfort, your personal preferences.
Yeah.
And some of what happens is the muscles of lament atrophy.
Hmm.
And yet we have a higher responsibility to keep practicing these things
Yeah.
because this is something the world needs right now.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love I love saying to people, when they try to downplay something, I always want to say like, do you feel like this is going well? Because every day I wake up with a sense of just like brokenness. And if you don't have that, I would love to know why.
I'd like to borrow some of
A
that from
hundred
you.
percent, right?
Right. Yeah.
But we are meant to meet people in those spaces. And one of the things that you talked about that I want to ask about is there are folks who are in your church. There are folks who are reading your book who are discovering grief. I think is probably the right way to say
Yeah.
this, where it's
Yeah.
something that they've told themselves wasn't a big deal, or
Yep.
it's something that they are just now beginning to address,
Yep.
right? I'm curious what it looks like to grieve something
Like
that you
retroactively.
that you previously ignored in the way that's
Yeah.
different than some of the slow walk that you and I have been talking about for so far today.
Yeah, I actually think it's very powerful and very meaningful and part of our healing. To be able to grieve retroactively things you may have brushed aside, ignored, were told weren't a big deal, lied to yourself that they weren't a big deal, and some of it we do out of self-preservation. And I
Sure.
think there is grace for that. So what you don't want to add on to that is like, why didn't I grieve this thing from my past? It's okay. You did the best you could with the information you had at the time, right?
Right. Right.
But when you realize, oh, I have harbored anger at God that I haven't expressed to him. Oh, that did really shake my identity and the scaffolding of my faith in a way that I haven't actually given credence to. Again, I think going back to our original, what we were talking about before, Ross, I think having that sort of a rise in you and paying attention to that is something God is doing because God is inviting you into deeper healing.
Yeah.
And what can happen, I don't know if your listeners watch this on audio or not, so I'm going to try to describe what I'm doing, but we tend to think I'm holding a pen in my
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
We tend to think our spiritual growth goes around the pen, or let's say it's the end of a spiral notebook, around the spiral notebook, and we're going up and we're going up and we're going up, and then we're healed and we're in
Right.
heaven or we're with Jesus or whatever. But actually, I just said that so flippantly. I'm so
I
sorry.
love
I
it. No, no,
I
no, no.
love Jesus. I can't
Yeah,
wait for
yeah,
new creation.
yeah.
But I actually think if we're going to be realistic, our spiritual growth and healing is actually downward in that spiral. We're going down, 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 deeper into who God says we are, deeper into who we are. And so what that means is you're going to go around the spiral again and you're going to think, I've solved this thing. I've worked through this issue. I am not hurt by this thing. But then you hit a point because of life, circumstances, change, transition, what have you, where you are like at the same place in the spiral, hitting the same issue. And you're like, why am I here again? But actually, you're a layer deeper. And
Yeah.
actually, it's because the Lord wants to do some deeper healing in you. And so we can beat ourselves up. Why didn't I get the healing there? I thought I was over this. No, no, no. You're just going down a little deeper because the Lord heals us as we're ready,
Mm,
as we're able, when our souls, when our hearts, when our minds can go there. God's like, hey, there's another level of healing. And
mm,
that is God's goodness. Like he doesn't leave us in the shallow place. Our growth and our formation are in the really, really deep places of our souls because that's where God works. Like that's where God does the real transformation in us. And so I can't totally remember your question, Ross.
prolonged grief. I,
Prolonged grief.
yeah, yeah,
Again, what I'm trying to say is that it is normal, acceptable part of God's formation in us to bring up some of those things so
yeah.
that we can heal from them. It's good. It's a good thing.
Man, that'll preach. Holy cow. Okay. And this is why in your intro, I talk about like, I want folks to dive deeper into the work you're doing every day because the most basic thing we can say about grief is that it's not linear.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is, I think, why your ministry is so important right now is because you have walked out some of the things you talk about in your book, right? This is not a case of you working out in the pulpit in
Right.
the pejorative
Right.
sense, right?
Right.
Like you have done the work to
I
walk
have
these things out.
lived this. Yeah.
Yes, so that it can be helpful for folks, etc.
Yeah.
I'm saying that in case there's any psychologists listening, right? I want to offer that qualification,
I love
but
therapy. I go to therapy. Just so that
amen, same.
all the therapists know.
But what I think is so helpful and the reason it resonates so much is because you have provided for people multiple different ways to enter into this conversation in multiple different ways for people to feel like they can be heard.
Mm.
And I think if you, I love asking pastors, and we can, this can be the last question because I love asking pastors about their roles in leadership because I think there's a strong correlation between the emotions, how you guys process that, you guys as
Yeah.
pastors, you guys as that whole ordained and set
Right.
apart thing, equally flippant to your revelation, and folks who've been walking with Jesus for a long time.
Yeah.
Because what to put all of this rambling into the form of a question, one of the things that I'm curious about for folks is what does it look like for you to do this in the everyday, non-linear, down the
Yeah.
spiral kind of way
Yeah. Yeah.
without doing it because it's your job or because
Yeah.
you're supposed to have already figured this out. But you're
Yeah.
doing it as a child of God and nothing else
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. I mean, the real honest answer that is again another story, but when Jen died, here I am a pastor, I'm a teaching pastor at the time. And so I'm planning sermons, preaching sermons, preparing sermons, writing sermons for quote work. But in my personal life, I could not go near my Bible.
Mm,
And I would, it almost makes me cry to think about now, Ross, but I would walk by, I have this beautiful little tiny book room where my Bible and my journal sit. That is where I connect with God. That is my holy place with the Lord. And after Jen died, I would walk by it and I go, you just stay over there. I'm not ready for you. I cannot connect with you in that intimate way. Now I could read the word for study. I could prepare.
sure.
But internally I was like, I don't know. It felt too intimate to trust God by opening the Word of God again. If that makes sense, that might be a weird
Yeah,
thing to say, but it was like I had been betrayed by a friend and I wasn't ready to enter back into the relationship. And in God's kindness, piece by piece, I mean, and this took me a good year to even open the scriptures again, just for like personal connection with the Lord. I just started reading one psalm and then I would read that same psalm again. And then I would read it again. I started calling it inchworm Bible reading. Like, okay, Lord, I can try an inch at a time, you know. And
Coming
I
soon to you version.
that's my next book.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, no, I felt like in that the Lord was just slowly like, it's okay, Obs.
yeah,
I know where you are. You don't I know you're a pastor. I know you have work to do, but you're also my daughter. And so it's okay. I know. All right, let's just try a little bit at a time. Can we, and just God slowly, slowly, slowly. I mean, I think I thought it was me, but all the time it was the Lord drawing me back to himself. And I think also particularly the Psalms because we don't have answers, of course, to the big questions of evil and pain and suffering. We certainly have God's presence and the
hmm
story of what Jesus will one day do and started to do on the cross and at his resurrection. But what we do have is this beautiful book of art and poetry and lament in the middle of the Bible. And so I felt like I could go, okay, I can go to the Psalms. And the reason I'm saying that is because part of the work when you're a local pastor grieving and you're a local pastor carrying other people's pain and you're a local pastor just in your own like kind of mess in your head
yeah.
is to remember like no, but first and foremost I'm a daughter, and that means the Lord is patient with me and the Lord is not pushing me past some finish line of pain. I just get to be where I am with Jesus. And that's what I would say to all your listeners, every church I go to, like you get to be where you are because God is infinitely patient and pacing with you, and somehow he's in it doing something good. And I feel like that's my testimony. Like the Lord slowly brought me back, opened my heart again. And then eventually the sermons and the personal life come back together but it's okay. I think there's grace for those seasons and the Lord knows.